little bit of housekeeping, as we are quite a lot of people on a Zoom meeting. If I can click this across. So just a little guide to the session. It will be recorded, so please, we ask participants to have your computers on mute if possible, please. We have support from Becky Whittle from the NRFC, who can answer any questions you may be having. If you're having some technical issues, you can use the chat function to message Becky privately, or you can put it in the main chat function as well. We do encourage that chat function is used. So you can see here on the image, you know, the chat function is part of the bar at the bottom of your Zoom screen. It would be really great, because there are quite a lot planning to join this call. We haven't got time to go around everybody, unfortunately, and meet in virtual person. So if you could introduce yourself in the chat and say who you are and what brings you here, or what organisation or farm you're with, that would be great. And we'll be saving the chat and the recording of this, so that it's another opportunity to be able to network with people as well, where we can't all be in a room all together, sadly. So the way the session is set out is we've got a series of short presentations from our speakers, and then it moves very quickly straight on to discussions and Q&A. So this is our panel. We've got a great range of experience, from farmers through to researchers and practitioners with varying experience in agroforestry. I'm your chair. My name is Kate Pressland. I'm the Programme Manager of Innovative Farmers, which is a programme supporting farmers and researchers collaborating together on-farm trials called Field Labs. We're all here today to learn a bit more about agroforestry and the practical opportunities, the benefits, and the wider benefits that it could bring. And I'm sure the panel can discuss about lots of the challenges that you can face as well, and how you overcome them. The government dramatically undershot its targets of planting trees last year and has vowed for 30,000 trees to be planted this year. But how do farms go about setting up agroforestry on their farm? How do you plan the scheme? Where is suitable land? What support is available? What are the barriers? What are the costs? What is the business case for setting this land into different use? The evidence on planting trees for biodiversity, for soil health, water management, carbon sequestration, that's all quite well evidenced, and there's more evidence building, but it's quite intuitive, but the evidence is not there for an individual who's never done that before. You know, what are the challenges for you? How do you set about getting that going? So our panel have a wide range of experience, and we hope that you will leave this session today with some of the issues demystified and feeling a bit inspired too. So without further ado, I'm going to stop talking, and I'll pass now over to Ben Raskin. Ben designed and established and now manages an agroforestry project and a farm in Wiltshire, Eastbrook Farm. So thanks, Ben. When you want to switch slides, just let me know and I'll ping that across. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Kate. So yes, about 30 years ago, I worked on a vineyard in northern Italy, and that's when I first got inspired on horticulture. And then following that, when I came back to the UK, I worked for around 12 years as a commercial vegetable producer with some fruit, before accidentally joining the Soil Association on a 2-year contract that has now lasted for 14 years. So that's kind of roughly my journey. But about 10 years ago, I guess, I started getting more interested in agroforestry, and I think what drew me to it initially was having always worked on mixed vegetable farms. I wasn't a big scale farmer. I was on sort of 10, 15 acres of veg, growing 50, 60 different crops, and I'd seen how these complex mixed farming systems worked and how the diversity worked. And for me, the trees really were the next stage in that, apart from the fact that I also love eating fruit. But so it's that sort of complexity and diverse systems that really interests me. And the picture here is so about 10 years ago, I rented 2 acres of land on an old nursery site just south of Bristol, with the view to setting up quite an intensive horticultural agroforestry system. So with about 10 meters between the rows, and they were going to be quite closely pruned espalier systems. Unfortunately, after the trees being in the ground for 2 years, the landlord went bust, and I had to move all the trees, and it coincided with the birth of my second son, and all the trees ended up getting healed in somewhere and eaten by rabbits. So that whole project unfortunately disappeared. But it did fuel that inspiration, that sort of interest and passion for agroforestry. And it was about the same time that I started pushing within the Soil Association, along with Helen Browning, who'd recently taken over, for us to do more agroforestry work. Next slide, please. So while we were developing some of that more policy and practical ideas around what to do with agroforestry, sort of alongside that, Helen had been wanting to do agroforestry on her farm for quite a while, and she runs a 1,500 acre farm, most of which is rented from the Church of England, and hadn't been able to plant trees. But she took over 200 acres that sort of came to her as part of the family trust being wound up. So she now had this 200 acres that she could do what she wanted with, and invited me to come and help her design and run that, which we've been doing now for 4.5 years. So we're trialing lots of different systems, and the idea really is that it's somewhere that we can explore climate change resilience. So that's whether that's growing species like these almonds in the picture that might work in the future, even if they're not quite ready now. But also that whole system resilience, so improving soil quality, improving drainage, shelter for the animals, for the crops. And one of Helen's big things is animal welfare and improving animal welfare. And I've become more knowledgeable. I'm still by no means an expert, but more knowledgeable about the benefits that trees can give to livestock as well. And particularly sort of working with people like Lindsey and others, really sort of understanding the wide-reaching benefits. Next slide, please. So my other big obsession is wood chip. And one of the real opportunities I think agroforestry brings is being able to produce your own wood chip within a farming system potentially. And we've got some, I didn't have time for all the slides, but there's a really striking example at Eastbrook where some trees got heavily mulched and some that didn't, and the ones that did are now 8 or 9 feet tall, and the ones that didn't are still 3 feet tall. But we're really exploring ways that we can use wood chip for tree health. So in this example, you can see we've mulched the row of trees using a silage wagon. Actually, we sort of slightly adapted it to spew the wood chip out the side, but also potentially spreading it out across the field to improve soil health. And the Organic Research Centre are doing some really interesting work on that at the moment. Next slide, please. So, yeah, I mean, animals are not something that I have a lot of expertise in, but the challenge for me, one of the challenges I think for agroforestry is how do we take these, what essentially are sort of permaculture or whole system approaches that we know are very productive and we know are healthy, but are not always easily translatable into a commercial farming setting. And I think that's one of the things we'd like to do at Eastbrook, is to be able to show what works or what doesn't work, and a lot of things we're trying aren't working. But looking at how you translate that into something that can work commercially, that's relatively practical, relatively achievable, relatively scalable. So in this field, we've got rows of mainly perry pears, but with some timber trees, and they're interplanted with willow and alder, which we're going to coppice. And we've got 27-metre spacing between those trees. So that's the Stephen Briggs sort of calculations around fitting machinery in between that alleys. So this is a 45-acre field that was bleak and windswept, and we're hoping will be less so once the trees are there. But we've also then been able to implement a rotational grazing system within the paddocks that the trees create. So it not only brings in that element of trees, but it potentially changes the whole way that you manage the farm. So I think that's all from me, and I will pass on to the next person. Thanks.
Well, many thanks, Ben. That was really interesting. Now I'd like to introduce Dr. Lindsey Wiston from Organic Research Centre, who's a senior livestock researcher brimming with knowledge about how trees can benefit livestock. Thanks, Lindsey.
Always best to unmute myself first. Thanks, Kate. I was going to say, I don't know which comes first, the enthusiasm or the knowledge, but hopefully there's enough of both. Yeah, so as Kate said, I work for the Organic Research Centre, but my background is I came from a farming family, and my first job was really milking cows at the age of 17, bunked off education and then came back at a later date. I mean, really, when I was working on farms, my motivation was to be the best stockman and the best animal carer that I could possibly be. And that for me meant knowing the animals and knowing the animals intimately and how we best could give them a good life and a life worth living. And that's really what led me into research, because those questions I needed answers to weren't being provided to me, or I couldn't find on a practical life on farm. Next slide, please. Thanks. So when I talk about giving animals a good life and a life worth living, I mean, this really requires an intimate understanding of an animal's relationship, not just with the human carers, but also with the environment around it, both as an individual and as a member of their social group. So really understanding what that environment gives them, what it can do for them, and how best we can create those environments that fulfill their needs and their wants. And when you start to think about the outdoor environment in this way, then trees become a really integral part of this story. And when you put trees in, you begin to see the multiple benefits that can come to the animals. So we're talking about improved social behaviour within the herd. We're talking about enabling body maintenance in the form of coat care. Skin is, after all, the frontline defence against disease. So they can rub away the dead hair, the dead skin, external parasites, seeds that can penetrate the skin, those kinds of things. Trees provide a really good source of nutrients, both micro and macronutrients. They also offer a source of medicine, for example, managing parasites, inflammation, pain relief. And then it also gives shade and shelter. And we're still talking about shade as the single most important thing that trees do across the globe. Yeah, next slide, please. So whilst accepting these animals are farmed animals and that we have a purpose for them, by allowing them to actively engage with their own lives and to be themselves, I think brings us closer to being better guardians of these animals and the plants that exist within these ecological systems within which they belong. And this will ultimately lead us to be better guardians of the planet overall. Next slide, please. So I'm currently working in various aspects of agroforestry research. One of those elements is tree fodder, which we're working with a few other universities and the Woodland Trust. So we're looking at nutritional analysis of the leaves of various trees. And one of our most recent findings is that cobalt is high in willow, goat willow, and that this could potentially be a useful resource for lambs on grass once they're weaned. I'm also working on the influences of shelter on livestock and crops in mixed systems, and also on another project working within innovative farmers in a silvopasture field lab, where we'll be looking at animal benefits, biodiversity, and also working alongside Northwick, Rothamsted research, looking at hydrology and carbon capture. So really quite exciting areas to be looking into at the moment. And I would also say that if you're interested in trees and farming, now is a pretty good time to to be interested, because there's a lot of motivation to really get some new knowledge and to get this moving overall. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks so much, Lindsey. Following on neatly from that, I'd like to introduce Andy Gray, who is just starting on an agroforestry journey with the field lab Lindsey just mentioned in Devon, in collaboration with FWAG, Southwest, Woodland Trust and Rothamsted's Farm-In programme. Thanks very much, Andy.
Hello, everybody. So my previous experience has been with cider production at the family farm. We've farmed for 450 years, growing standard orchards and with livestock underneath them. So we've done this for a long time. Orchards can be a great source of biodiversity unless you spray the life out of them, in which case they're not necessarily quite so good. But the livestock in our orchards have, in my observation, always been happy. Next slide, please. And certainly, okay, thank you. The ewes and lambs we would always turn out into orchards because it was a softer, nicer place for them to be, and they thrived in there to begin with before moving onto more windswept pastures. There's a balance between loss of yield on grassland due to the shading historically. So we always thought we lost about 10 to 20% of our grass yield, but we replaced that with 400 to 750 gallons a year of cider, depending on the cycle of the biennial cropping apples. So that 400 to 750 gallons a year of cider would certainly, in monetary terms, replace the reduction in yields. And also there's a farm resilience in having the dual income from your land, and that through the 1930s, and actually in the previous recession in the sort of 1870s or 80s, whenever it was, when the Corn Laws came in, saw our family through major recessions when farming failed, but people carried on drinking cider. So next please. So my idea for our ground is to grow a certain amount of chestnuts and walnuts, and but part of the logic with the chestnuts amongst this mix of trees is, one, we can sell them, but two, we're deer farmers and deer thrive on chestnuts, and they also finish in the autumn, and if we can put extra meat on the deer, then that's gonna help by eating chestnuts. Chestnuts are about 28% carbohydrate, so it's a rocket fuel for livestock. So pigs and deer will do remarkably well on them, and they can open up the prickliness. And but it's also, because I'm a butcher as well as a farmer, and we supply 600 or so catering customers, we are directly linked to our customers, and it gives us a point of difference when selling meat. But we can actually claim the silvopasture thing, the benefits that this brings to the environment, which a lot of our customers are now much more interested in. And the chefs who are mainly interested in flavor, then you can tell them it's been finished on acorns and chestnuts and things like that, and that adds to the story that they can put on their blackboard. So it's a great marketing tool, as well as doing lots and lots of other things that we want to do. I mean, the main driver for me is well, there's two drivers really. One, I just like the system. I like the idea. I think that we have to find out better ways to do things. But it's an overall increase in profitability within an existing land system. So, I mean, one tends to measure grass yield, but I'm much more interested in actually measuring meat yield on that acreage. And there's lots of things we know. We know that hot or cold stress reduces food conversion ratios and exposes livestock to more illness, which further erodes the food conversion ratios. So there's that benefit. We know trees rapidly improve soil health. We know that deeper rooting plants cycle through a greater abundance of trace elements and deliver them to our grassland above and our livestock. We know trees increase the mycorrhizal activity. We know that they improve the porosity of the soil, and that can extend your grazing season. So it's all potentially adding to the profitability of the unit. We know that browse helps animal health. And one of the joys with signing up to the, being one of the farmers who have signed up to these field lab trials, is that we can actually hopefully quantify all these things, and that potentially can bring it to a wider audience, and two, potentially might inform government policy, which at the moment is visibly poor when it comes to dealing with silvopasture. Basically, trees stay in woods and grass stays on the landscape, and the two never mix at the moment when it comes to government policy. So if there's any government policy people out there listening to this, please take a note of all that. But what we're going to measure in this system, we're going to be measuring soil carbon, the hydrology, and maybe the soil biology. We're going to be measuring the biodiversity above ground, for focusing on metrics with agricultural connotations, so flies and their predators, dung beetles and birds, as well as potentially moths and bats. And then sward composition and yield, and its response to the change in light levels as a key variable. From the point of view of my profitability, the cash crops that I can see coming in, because we have a direct route to market, is if we have an inexpensive oil press, we can do oil, walnut oil and hazelnut oil. We can sell chestnuts for roasting or flour. Cash crops also include pollard, which we're going to feed direct to the livestock. And once we've done that, we can also use that pollard for fence posts. There's biomass, and I haven't put on my list there, but there's also the potential to put in yurts and shepherd huts in a much more conducive to enjoyment style on the landscape, and sprinkle a few deer around them. That just makes it more interesting. So there's commercial opportunities opening up from having a more diverse landscape beyond the obvious just production. So next slide, please.
That's your last slide, Andy.
That's the last slide, is it? Good.
Yes, that is.
Have I done for my time?
Yes, well, please do. You've got another minute, Andy.
Okay, right. I mean, my other interest and concern with all this is the development of, it's the opportunity costs during the establishment period. And my way of dealing with it is to sign up to a 5-year wildlife officer and offer, and in that we're allowed to plant trees on pollen mixes. So I'm going to put pollen mixes in all the areas, and that gives me an income during the establishment period. And the alternative establishment is to plant the whole landscape with the trees where you want them, but biomass between them. And then after 6 or 7 years of biomass, cut down the biomass, leaving the original trees there. But my one piece of advice is, if you're interested, start now, because it takes such a long time. You need to find out whether or not it's going to work. So start on a small scale, learn from your mistakes, and then potentially, if you've discovered that it's a great idea, then you've already learned from your mistakes, and you're ahead of the game. So thank you very much.
Wise words there, Andy. Thank you so much. Now I'd like to introduce another farmer we have joining us, Paul Rennison, who farms, I'm going to say this correctly, Canaher Farm in Cumbria with his wife, Nick. The Rennison started an agroforestry project a few years back now, so I've learned a lot during the way, no doubt. Thanks, Paul.
Hi there, everyone. It's my first one of these, so I'm a little bit nervous, but have to bear with me. So we moved to Canaher in 2012, and we came out of the Lake District from a fell farm there, and came to this farm. So we had very traditional mindset, and one of the first things that was pretty obvious when we did arrive was it was very little shelter, apart from all the dry stone walls. So we got stocked up and started farming, and then we joined the high level stewardship, HLS, and through that we were able to pinpoint areas that would be really good for planting, and perhaps give us some shelter belts, and also link up some habitats as well. But currently, just go back to the farm. We're farming sheep, cattle. We've got pigs in the woodlands, and we're doing pasture-reared poultry as well. And the latter two were really through coming here and farming traditionally, and then then we went on YouTube, looked around, and got inspired by Richard Perkins and Joel Salatin and all these kind of people. And we stopped our traditional set stocking pretty well overnight, and started a rotational system. And then what I found was I was splitting all these fields with electric fences, and then I was thinking, well, actually, if I put in a fence there, or a double fence, put a hedge in the middle of it, I'll never have to keep on resetting this electric fence. I've got trees in there, I've got a natural shelter, and then I can subdivide from that. Let me think. What I'm losing my train of thought here a little bit. But it's from this first slide, anyway, I'll say the higher level stewardship got us planting these trees. So 2015, we put these ones in, and then this morning I went out, took a picture. It was a lovely day, and that's in sort of 5 years, 5 or 6 years growth is pretty amazing. I mean, there's a little bit of loss in there from wind damage because we get battered by the west and the westerly winds, and we get this thing called a helm wind, which is a easterly wind, which gets pretty strong. So I think one of my problems was I'd always be looking at trees and thinking, oh, they've been blown over, or, you know, it's a bit of a pain. But I think you've just got to accept some of those losses and deer damage, and keep planting in between where your losses were. And then you gradually fill out. But in 5 years' time, there's a lot of growth there. So moving on to the next slide, please. So here on the left, we've got year 0. I think this is just a field that we decided to, it was a 12-acre field, decided to split it in half lengthways so that it'd still be easy to mow and make silage or hay if we needed to. And then next, I decided actually in that field that we'll put another hedge up 3 meters to the one side of it and put a hedge in the middle of it. So we've created more shelter there. And originally, like, to begin with, you think you're going to lose quite a lot of grazing or mowing land and things, but I think what you actually gain from putting the fence in, you make it doubly stock proof, and then with a hedge in the middle, in 3 or 4 or 5 years time, you've got a bit of a windbreak there. So especially in the wind area, that is a real benefit. The second slide is our first winter on a higher level stewardship hedge that we put in, and we got a digger in and made a sod kest, which is just a big mound from the earth on either side of the fence, and then planted into that. And we found we got a really, really good take from that hedge. It's a mixed hedge. And then on the right hand side of that, this is be 5 years later or so, that hedge is really coming on now. And then can we go on to the next slide? Thank you. So I've moved on now. One year I saw a load of cattle eating crab apples and just going crazy for crab apples. And I was thinking, God, there must be something in those that they absolutely love or they need. So why don't we, next hedge we put in, let's put a load of crab apples in, and some more tree fodder for them to see if we can sort of improve their diets. So with this hedge, we've gone for, instead of a 3 meter wide hedge, we've gone for a 5 meter wide hedge, split a field in the middle, and we put edible things on the outside. So there's 5 lines within the hedge. We've got edible things on the outside, which are, we've got willow, hazel, and there's a bit of hawthorn in there. Then the next line in, we put in crab apples, rowan, and wild cherries. And then in the middle line, we put oaks and silver birch, with a view to thinning the silver birches out and leaving a stand of oaks. But either side, I've got fence either side of this with electric smooth wire on top. And from that, I then subdivide this field. It depends how many stock we've got, but at the moment I've got cattle in there at the moment. There'll be 100 head. I've split this 8-acre field into 4. So I've got 4 days on day shifts, and I've made it easy because the top line is smooth electric with it on insulators. And so once I put the battery pack on there and the energizer, the whole fence is electrified. And so, yeah, with that little bit of future proofing and things, I think we've had a few losses this winter, this summer because of the drought. We'll fill in this winter, patch it up, and hopefully in years to come, this will be a really good windbreak and a fodder break as well. So that's me, but thank you very much, and I'll pass over to the next person.
Many thanks, Paul. That was really interesting. And one of the questions we've had through the chat actually was, how do you choose varieties? How do you choose species? So we'll come back to that in the Q&A. Also, that was a question for Andy as well. So we'll come back to that. Now, I'd like to introduce as our final speaker, Helen Cheshire, who's a senior advisor for the Woodland Trust, here to shed some light on the Woodland Trust's expertise and support for farmers interested in making the most of the land for trees. So thanks, Helen.
Again, unmute, helpful. Thanks, Kate. So yes, I actually grew up on a farm, dairy and sheep farm in Leicestershire, so not quite the north, but I do have a farming background, but I've worked for the Trust now for quite a long time, and certainly over the last 7 or 8 years I've been focusing on helping to advocate the benefits of agroforestry to farmers. So you may ask, why is the Woodland Trust interested in agroforestry? As a woodland conservation charity, our objective is to create a more resilient treed landscape. We want to protect, restore and expand native tree cover throughout the UK. And obviously with farmers managing over 70% of the UK land area, we're really keen to work with the farming sector to help maximise the benefits from a more treed landscape, to help tackle the climate change emergency, the terrible declines in nature, but very importantly to help support sustainable food production. And that's, as we've heard from the previous speakers, that's this win-win of agroforestry, one of those systems which can deliver all those public goods whilst supporting food production with none of the normal trade-offs. Just a few points on this slide. I think as the Woodland Trust, obviously we will be advocating native trees in most situations. We believe that they are most adapted to resilience and climate change, as well as being able to deliver a whole array of benefits. Key is diversity. I think everybody's very aware of all the tree diseases, particularly things like ash dieback, which are really impacting a typical farm tree. So, you know, we need diversity, native species, and I think very, very importantly, we need to think very carefully about importing tree stock if we're going to expand. The Woodland Trust has a strict policy of only providing and planting UK and Ireland sourced and grown tree plant material, and there's more details about that on our website because we have a whole scheme of accrediting quite a large number now of tree nurseries in the UK. I think we also all start to need to think about natural regen, and I think that has a real role to play probably up in the uplands alongside planting, partly because if we're really going to expand tree cover in the way that we would certainly like to see to help tackle those that climate and nature crisis, we don't have enough stock in the system in the nurseries in the UK to do that without utilising natural regen where appropriate. So it's all about the right tree in the right place. Next slide, please. So yeah, as you know, what can the Woodland Trust do to help farmers? Well, we realised that there was this, you know, we've talked about all the benefits of agroforestry, but there's still not a lot of farmers that are practicing agroforestry. And so why is that? A lot of it is down to policy. I mean, there are a lot of barriers, and we can talk about that more in the Q&A, but one of the main barriers has been policy, and certainly England, DEFRA, didn't take up the agroforestry options in the last CAP round, and although Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland did to agree, there were very limited schemes. So about 7 years ago, the Woodland Trust was fortunate enough to secure some corporate funding, which was specified to help plant trees on farms. So we developed our own scheme called Trees for Your Farm, very much a pilot scheme. We've had about 150,000 trees funded to date, which has helped create over 100 schemes throughout the UK, with another further 20 approved to be planted this season. It allows our outreach advisors to come out to a farm that's interested in applying for the scheme, to walk and talk around the farm with the farmer to understand why they're interested in trees, what objectives they may have for those trees, and what some of the issues they feel those trees may help to address. We then put together a design. We have a simple application process, and if successful, in most cases, the farmer will receive fully funded trees and protection, and in return the farmer will provide the labour to plant and establish those trees. From our point of view, it's been a great success. I mean, Paul can tell you whether it's worked for him or not, because Paul and Nick have benefited from the scheme. But it's enabled us to work with these really inspiring farmers who are on that journey of learning and implementing agroforestry. They are incredibly effective at influencing their peers, at talking at events like this, or hosting them for farm walks, or being active on social media. But they're also incredibly powerful and helpful with us in working with organisations like the Woodland Trust and the Soil Association to try and influence government to change future policy. So yeah, it's been, from that point of view, it's been really successful. Next slide, please. Just very quickly, the Woodland Trust does have two more sort of general schemes that support all landowners, so you don't have to be a farmer. More Woods really is designed to fit below the standard woodland creation scheme. So this is for any landowner who just wants to create a small piece of woodland, but for a minimum size of 0.5 hectares, but that can be split into sort of small blocks or shelter belts. So it's a subsidised scheme. Again, you get advice from one of our outreach advisors, and usually the Woodland Trust will fund up to 75% of the costs. And again, we supply the trees and guards through our procurement process. Next slide, please. And then More Hedges really does what it says on the can. So again, helping fund hedgerow planting throughout for any landowner. It's designed really to be situated where it helps to link between existing woodland habitats. So obviously from a Woodland Trust perspective, we're very keen to buffer and protect, fragmented areas, particularly of ancient woodland, but any type of woodland on land. And we also asked that for every 6 metres of hedgerow, a tree is allowed to grow up to become a hedgerow tree. But again, it's a very, very popular scheme. Both More Hedges and More Woods are funded by corporate supporters, and all three of our schemes demand far exceeds supply. Next slide, please. So yeah, so just really to sort of summarise before we have a Q&A, that we believe that there's some really, really strong opportunities for agroforestry to really expand. It currently is a very small land use within the farming sector, and certainly when I was at agricultural college, which admittedly was many moons ago, you didn't get taught about agroforestry or the benefits of it. There's lots of barriers and reasons why, and obviously I've alluded to the policy one. So I think it's going to be absolutely essential that the new environmental land management schemes in England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland really do support farmers to take up agroforestry. Ourselves, the Woodland Trust, along with the Soil Association, the Organic Research Centre and Abacus Agriculture, and for those of you who are into agroforestry, that's Stephen Briggs's consultancy, who I think still has the largest silver arable scheme in the UK. We have just been awarded a DEFRA test and trial in agroforestry, so that will be commencing in November. And the aim of that is to assess primarily what advice and guidance and payment incentives farmers would require for them to take up agroforestry at scale. The design of the project will be to be focused on 6 regional farmer-led hubs so that we can assess these requirements, looking at all different types of farming systems and looking at different agroforestry designs. So one of those hubs will be up in an upland situation, looking at sort of the role of wood pasture and silver pastoral in more upland situations. So yeah, we can perhaps talk about that more in the Q&A or find out more details from us afterwards. But yeah, I think knowledge and expertise is key, and that's a picture of one of our outreach advisors with one of the farmers we've worked with in Staffordshire, giving him advice about his tree cages, or his trees in his tree cages. But I think, funding, markets are all, the structure of how agroforestry is incorporated into, breaks down those barriers between agriculture and forestry is critical. And yeah, we need that farmer to farmer enthusiasm, and then I think it can take off at scale. Thank you.
Well, many thanks, Helen, and to all of our speakers. So now we're going to go over to the chat section where we've had some questions coming in, but I'm going to use and abuse Chair's privilege to start with asking the farmers on the panel. Could you could you pinpoint, like, what was the biggest hurdle you saw that you had to overcome to get agroforestry sort of either planned or set up or started on the farm? And if I could go to Paul first, what was that the biggest challenge, and how did you overcome it?
Yeah, I think probably the biggest challenge is funding for us, and luckily we managed to get into the higher level stewardship, and with them later and latterly got into the countryside stewardship. And then we've had an awful lot of help from the Woodland Trust, which I forgot to say when I was first talking. So through Helen and a chap called Pete Leeson, who works in our area, and they've been brilliant at giving us advice and support, and ultimately quite a few trees. So it's been good. Okay,
great. And Andy, what would you consider? I mean, you're at the earlier stages, but what has been the biggest hurdle? You've alluded to a couple of them in your talk, but what would you say was like the biggest one, and how you got over that?
Yeah, I'm not sure which I'd think of as the biggest, but certainly the opportunity cost on the landscape's one. The funding is another, which has been helped with the Woodland Trust again. I mean, the other thing is, this trees are for a long time, and sometimes it's just the inertia of thinking through what the hell you want. So having the advice from somebody like Lindsey is a big help, because it's so easy to make a mistake and then be regretting it for a long time. So good advice is also another thing, really.
And Ben, with your experience at Eastbrook, what would you say was like the biggest problem you encountered, or at least the first problem? They're probably all quite interrelated, but from your experience, what was that?
I think, I mean, there's possibly two ways to answer that. One is from Helen's point of view. So initially, she being a tenant, that was an issue. And I think the conversation is moving now, and I think landlords are becoming more open to it, but there's still some challenges around that. So sort of planting on rented land is definitely an issue. I think the other thing for Helen was, she's a farmer and she had a farm team. She didn't necessarily have someone that knew about trees, and that's why I was asked to be involved. And I think there, that challenge actually is also a massive opportunity. So there's maybe not so much when you're just planting for shelter or for sort of wood chip, which is relatively simple, but if you start planting for another product, whether that's fruit or or nuts, which then need to be processed, that's a whole nother set of pruning skills or harvesting skills and processing skills that some farmers obviously are up for, but not all of them. And so being able to bring in someone that might take responsibility and manage those trees is quite an interesting opportunity. And there's some, Dartington have done some really interesting work looking at tenancy agreements and bringing in sort of multiple partners in a farm. And cost is, is definitely big, even where you're really up for it, and you really want to do it, it's still a big chunk to find. I think that's why Andy's advice to start on a small scale is really sensible. A few trees don't cost that much, and you learn a lot in year 1 and 2. And certainly we've taken the approach to, we haven't planted 200 acres in one go, partly because we couldn't afford to, but partly it would have been madness. We want to learn what does well and how we manage it, and which fencing works and which doesn't. And we're working with cattle mainly, so that's a particular set of challenges. And whereas if you're working with sheep, it might be slightly different. So there's lots of things that are going to be particular to your site and your system that learning on a small scale is really helpful.
Thank you, that's really helpful. I just want to pull out a couple of questions from the chat. One that we had earlier for Andy, but I think also for Paul, is how do you choose the varieties, Andy? How did you go about choosing what you were going to grow? Now, you talked a bit about the chestnuts for your deer, but how else did you sort of think of the combination?
Well, I can remember a neighbour giving me advice on cover crop planting, and he just said plant every damn thing and see what grows. And to an extent, there's a bit of that involved. Lindsey's given me a certain amount of advice. Obviously, I have a market which I can fulfil with part of these trees. So there's the cash crop aspect. There's the what's going to suit my livestock aspect. I look in my hedges and see what grows there. I don't think one can ever get away from how important it is to observe what's going on around you in every aspect of life. And this is just another version of that, observing what works and what doesn't on your own landscape. Just to ask advice, think about it, obsess about it, but think about what's going to make you money. You have to make money at the end of the day. It's great to do all these things, but having something you can sell is a good thing, as well as all the slightly less tangible benefits that you get from doing this. But I think there's so many benefits that it's difficult to put which ones are at the top. So.
Making that business case is tricky, isn't it? And Paul, there was a question here about from Tim Nicholson saying, were your apple trees native, and have you got a mix of cookers and eaters? Again, it's around variety choice. How have you managed that?
Well, we haven't put any large apple variety trees in. We've just put crab apples in. Okay. So hope that answers that one.
There was a question that came in for Helen, actually. Do you have a test and trials site in Cumbria yet? Because it would be great to have one. And I think that was Tim Nicholson again saying, do you have any sites in that area?
Well, it hasn't started yet. The project starts in November, so we'll be meeting with Ben from the Soil Association and the Organic Research Centre and Abacus Agriculture to start planning it. So the actual hubs will be developed early in 2021, and definitely the aspiration will be to have one up in the north somewhere. So yes, good chance it will be Cumbria based, I'm sure. But But if people are interested, then please get in contact with us, because we are in a position where we want to contact all the relevant people that are interested.
Brilliant. And would you be looking for sites that are already established, or is pre-establishment looking to work?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing which we had to get a head around when we were applying for this is that it's actually not testing whether agroforestry works or not. It's the mechanics of how agroforestry will fit in the scheme. So the hubs will be focused around probably a sort of monitor type farm who has established agroforestry, and there'll be cluster farms around it who are at different stages of that journey on agroforestry, either have just started or thinking about it, or even will have rejected it. And then we'll be doing workshops which pull in all people from all sorts of backgrounds in that area to contribute to the thinking. So it's about how we make the scheme work, and with the two areas we're focusing on, as I say, are advice and guidance that farmers require, and the payment to make this work. So as both Paul and Andy have said, funding upfront is an issue, but also, the ongoing returns from these trees have to make money. They have to pay their way for the business.
Yes, absolutely. A question came in for Lindsey. What did you mean by trees as a source of medicine? What specifically are those examples as found by research?
Yeah, well, what I meant by medicine, really, well, let's start with the most obvious. If we're looking at sick animals, we can think of willow as the most obvious example, and I suppose most people now know that willow is where we get our aspirin from. So this is salicylic acid. It can provide a multiple number of benefits. So it's a pain relief medication, it has antimicrobial properties, it has antifungal properties, as well as anti-inflammatory properties. So this is a really good all-round tree to have. There's so much more that we don't yet know, but if we think on a slightly wider level and expand our idea of disease, if you like, to managing parasites, for example, the trees have condensed tannins, as do some other plants, and these condensed tannins can be really helpful to the animals managing intestinal parasites. And there is some evidence sheep with a heavy parasite burden, when they're given access to plants with condensed tannins, they can reduce their parasite load by 50%. If we think a little wider still, and we think about a lack of nutrients and a loss of nutrients, or a lack of nutrients that causes disease, then just having better nutrients available to the animals can help manage disease. And for example, one of the bits of research, agroforestry research, that's been carried out for lambs in Mediterranean conditions where there's very little green grass available to the lambs, so the vitamin E is very low. And we know that a lack of vitamin E and selenium can cause white mussel disease. So the proposal is that shrubs, agroforestry in these conditions will help against that disease in lambs.
Oh, that's really interesting. Really interesting. There was a question from Robert Mills for Andy saying the project, the field lab sounds really, really interesting, but he was keen, I think it slightly broke up as well when you were talking about what are the soil biology aspects you are intending to measure as you embark on this project?
I'm not entirely qualified to answer that because it's mainly Rothamsted that are doing it, but they're definitely looking at carbon levels. They are keen to look at mycorrhizals, but that's very expensive, so I'm not sure whether that'll happen or what level it will happen at. The porosity I'm most interested in. I'm very keen on delivering clean water to rivers, and the more that we can improve our porosity and also the capacity to hold water to be delivered back at a later date is all part of that mix. Soil biology as well, from the point of view of flora and fauna within the soil. I think they're going to be looking at that. But yeah, somebody from Rothamsted would give me a much better answer than I'm going to give you, unfortunately.
Very technical answer they'll give us. It's probably a good idea that it's a slightly higher level of what you're interested in. I think that raises another element around what's research needs to make sense for you in regards to your management decisions as well. It's all very well having lots of metrics that all sound great, but if you can apply it directly to how you then manage and what you know is achievable.
I mean, it's what you see as well. Our farm has been 60 years in arable, and the last 10 years we've been min-tilling, and you can smell the difference in the soil, you can see the difference in the runoff. It's responded incredibly well to improving the carbon levels. So the interesting thing will be to see how much more we can achieve. So a little bit of good is great, but a lot of good surely is going to be much greater. So it's down to living on the land and experiencing it, smelling it, feeling it, and everything else, as well as the fantastic research that Rothamsted are going to do.
Yeah, quite. And we had a question from Hannah Davis saying, could the panel advise what density would best support biodiversity? Obviously, other than tree species or size dependency, what density of trees is going to be sort of optimum? I wonder if this maybe, Helen, if you wanted to start on that one.
Well, I am not one of our outreach advisors, so I'm not an expert on this. I mean, it depends whether your densities are quite difficult when you're talking about agroforestry because it's the design of the agroforestry system. So, you know, woodland, if you're creating woodland for conservation biodiversity, then it's sort of 1,000 trees to maybe 1,600, which is a lot less than commercial forestry, which would be 2,500 trees per hectare. But I think with designs of agroforestry, it's everything from, you know, the alley cropping that we've had described to the hedgerows that Paul was describing, of his 3 metre to 5 metre wide hedgerows and the different designs within them. And then it's sort of Pete Leeson, who's been supporting Paul Rennison up in Cumbria, has been doing lots of planting of trees in small cages across within the pasture. So it's, you know, they'll all have their benefits for biodiversity, but it's quite difficult to sort of give a standard planting rate. Kind of avoiding answering the question.
Well, it's true. I mean, I think you have answered, isn't it? It's based on that design. Lindsey, I wonder from a research point of view, if you had a view on that.
Yes, I do, and I'm going to also avoid answering the question. But well, it is a difficult one. But the point I was going to make is that actually biodiversity is really important also for animal health and welfare, because when you start planting trees, you bring in something that's really attractive to insects. And among those insects are biting insects, irritating insects that annoy the animals and can bring in diseases such as conjunctivitis and things like that. But when you have enough trees, when you have a well-designed silvopasture system, what you then also bring in is the predators of those flies. and in a really meaningful way. So you're bringing in then the birds that are feeding from the flies, you're bringing in the dung beetles. Dung beetles, there are more of them, they're more active, so they're getting rid of the muck and getting it into the ground very quickly. And there's some evidence that when you take head fly counts on open pasture and in silvopasture, the head fly count is 40% lower in the silvopasture, even though there are more flies. So it's really critical to get enough trees to bring in the predator species to manage those problem species. Yeah.
And you come to that conclusion through just sort of trial and error, or is there a sort of body of evidence to kind of get you in the right ballpark to start? I think that's quite a challenge, isn't it, to know at what density, because it hugely affects costs and the land area that you're looking to work on.
Yeah, absolutely, it does. But it's also location specific in some ways as well, because if you've got strong winds, then you'll have fewer flies. Mm-hmm. So yes, I mean, it depends on the location. So I am going to absolutely avoid answering the question, but just to be aware that there can be too few trees, which could increase some of the real problems for livestock.
That's really interesting. I wasn't aware of that. That's really interesting. There's one question on here which I think is really interesting, from Anne Chapman, saying, could each speaker say something they've tried that's not worked, and what they've learned from that? And if we could start with Paul, did you try something that just failed, and what you took from that and how you moved on?
I don't know, I'm trying to think now.
A
lot of our failures have come from their natural failures. So they're either deer predation or browsing or drought. And they're our main failures, really. There's one thing that I'm thinking that willows, if you've got drains near willows, that's something that I would be wary of as well. I think the roots on willows are tricky and will fill up your drains.
Oh, well, that's good to know. Particularly important for wetland areas, I imagine. Yes, yeah. Quite. Andy.
Yeah, electric fencing deer, that was a failure. We basically electric fenced them out and they just went straight through. Once they got hungry, they went through it. Up until then they didn't, but once they were getting hungry, they did. We tried 3-dimensional fencing. That was much more successful, which is basically a line in front of the main line of fencing so that they get stung twice, once at each end. That slowed them down, but they still went through it. So, deer.
Determined deer. And Ben, what did you try? A big thing you tried that didn't work that you learnt from?
So we're most of the site we're planting is quite heavy clay and quite tricky to plant into. So we went through with a subsoiler and created a little slit, well, quite a big slit actually, to plant into, which made planting much quicker and much easier, and in theory allows the roots to establish well. Unfortunately, in 2018, it was so dry, the whole thing just split right open, exposing obviously the newly planted trees. So we lost quite a lot because of that. What was quite interesting though was that we started planting in January, didn't quite do it as quickly as we'd hoped. So some of the last ones didn't go until right at the end of February. The ones that went in January mostly did survive, and the ones that went in February mostly didn't. So even though the cracks did open up, because they'd had enough establishment time to get some roots lower down, they still survived. And then the ones that we managed to mulch with wood chips still survived even when the ground opened up, whereas the ones that we didn't survive. So one of the things I've heard is that rather than planting right in that slot, you plant sort of a few inches to one side, so you still get the benefits of that loose earth, but you don't suffer quite so much if it splits. But certainly planting early, mulching, and slightly to the side of the crack would be what we try and do next time.
Interesting. Yeah, I think the vagaries of the weather is an important factor, isn't it? Particularly nowadays. We had a question if anybody had any experience of growing food crops between trees. I mean, obviously, Andy, you said you had the farm was previously arable. Have you got any plans to grow crops in between the trees?
Not at the moment, but I think it's something which can potentially be done in the future. And I always look way into the future and think that you might be put off from doing this because you're thinking of driving great big tractors up and down. But I just feel that the future will hold a degree of robotics and drones and things like that. So I think it'll be easier to grow food crops in alley planted trees in the future than it is just at the moment. But that's all I know.
And Lindsey, with Wakeland's Agroforestry, are you aware of any research around growing food crops between the alley trees, or Ben or Helen, that goes to all three of you? You know, what's the experience like? You said it was silvo arable, which Stephen Briggs obviously has a very large land area on, but if none of the panel have particular experience in that area, what resources are there to find out more?
Yeah, well, I don't have personal experience of this, but I do know that Wakelands and Tolhurst Organics do some work in this area, and it is an established area, perhaps more in the tropics than here, but there is some happening, and I think rhubarb is one of the vegetables or fruits, or whichever group you want to put it in. Yeah, and perhaps one of the others has more to say.
Yeah, so I think all of this comes down to the interaction between the trees and the crops, and basically anything is possible. And so Lindsey mentioned rhubarb. I think that's Ian Tolles has been trying that in between the trees in the row, because they can cope with that sort of semi-shade. But there's also the interaction between the edge of the trees and the crop. And there's a grower he's retired now, Alan Schofield, in Lancashire, really, really good grower. And he was growing for 30 years in a small agroforestry system with pollarded alder. And he evolved this really quite complex rotation where he knew which crops did better immediately after pollarding. So he had the crops that needed the fuller sun, and he would plant them in that first rotation. And then as the trees got bigger, he would move towards salads, for instance, which is sort of smaller rooting and like a bit of shade. So he evolved this really dynamic rotation that took advantage of the potential benefits or otherwise of that system. And being older as well, being a nitrogen fixer, so when he pollarded it, he took the big stuff for the wood burner, but left all the small brash in the tree row. So he was getting the benefit when you cut the tree. There's a release of nitrogen from the roots, but also the benefit then when that brash was breaking down over the next 5 years, that was all being returned. So that's a really interesting system. But I would generally, I mean, the way that I would do it, because I like growing fruit trees as well, I would tend to have smaller fruit trees amongst the crops, because you're likely to get less competition. You know, if you're growing really big trees, then there are certainly some crops that will suffer. But yeah, but there's also the the temperature difference. So one of the things that is we've seen from Paul and Andy, you get that shelter for animals. Well, actually, you get that shelter for crops as well, and it can be 4 or 5 degrees warmer in a row, in between rows of trees, and it would be an exposed site. And Martin Bragg down at Shillingford in Devon, who's growing agroforestry and fruit, he reckons he can see a 2-week difference between the crops that he grows between the agroforestry and the ones that are on the exposed site. So there are some good examples of agroforestry, but what I don't think is there's not many people doing big scale cropping. There's quite a lot of nice small scale crop systems.
So in regards, we touched on this earlier about making the business case for a farm to put in an agroforestry scheme. What should the expectation of return be? It's trying to understand. You've got a lot of outward costs, and it's trying to understand how do you write that business plan and the expectations of what your return will be. If I could start with Paul on that, you know, what was your vision for what that would bring you?
Well, for us, it's really been lamb survivability, and people are always asking us about this, but it's very difficult to quantify. But at lambing time, because we lamb outside, if we've got more shelter, we'll definitely have more lambs. But it's very hard to quantify, you know, how much that has saved us. The other thing is, with some of the, especially with that 5 meter hedgerow I put in, I quite like to do wood chip in there, but you know, the proof's going to be in the pudding. How well it grows, I couldn't put a figure on it at the moment. And
are you seeing already a greater survivability in your lambs, or do you think the trees are still not quite big enough yet to provide that?
Probably not quite big enough, but it's what we've done with the sodcast and the 5 years growth it does produce quite a bit of shelter, but it's just hard to quantify.
Yeah, I think that's the challenge, isn't it? There's a kind of intuitive sense of it will benefit, but trying to make, because everything's changing all the time, trying to make the maths, you know, show that effect is challenging, definitely. And Andy, for you as well, making that business case for you, you've got a slightly different system where you've got the butchery and you have the deer, and thinking about that. But so perhaps it was a little clearer to you to make that model, but still it's quite a big leap. So how did you go from being an arable farm really to just say, well, actually this is what we're going to really dip in and do, and have you set yourself a time limit? You're going to try it for X amount of time, and if it doesn't work, if it doesn't pay, are you then going to change tact? Could you give a bit of insight into your plan?
I think there's an awful lot of gut feeling. I think knowing what good looks like and what bad looks like, and I think my arable farming looks bad, and I think that what we can do with this looks good. I think I could just see so many opportunities developing from it, that it's just much more complex than just the straightforward numbers on a page. I know the numbers, I mean, I'm the one who stresses the numbers on a page matter, but I just have a very, very strong feeling that the opportunities that will come from this, as well as all the benefits, they're just so great, and it's more gut feeling than anything else, I'm afraid, because none of us have really done it. But having said that, I look back at my history with cider production, and it's been an incredibly good income. It's probably 50% of the farm's income on my family farm for the last several hundred years. So you just can't knock that. 400 gallons is the worst case scenario on growing apples and producing cider. And I don't take my cider to a commodity market, which is determined by world events. I take it to the pub down the road and tell them what they're going to pay me. So an awful lot of farmers do produce for a commodity market. Personally, I've never grown anything where I didn't actually have a market for it. And I've known that I've sold it before I've even started growing it. But that's a attitudinal change, which some people want to take that leap, and some people don't like the degree of complexity involved in understanding the whole chain. So it works for me anyway. That's what I think it would work for a lot of other people. Thank you.
Interesting. There was a question here. Pollarding and Tree Hay.
Sorry, Kate, sorry, could I just...
oh, please do, yes, sorry.
Well, only because I think it's worth thinking about not just returns, but also reducing inputs. So, you know, Paul talked about lamb survival, but then you could also think about increased lamb growth rates with extra shelter. So they're not using that energy on keeping warm as they're growing. They're actually using it to put on muscle to grow properly. And you know, the shade and the shelter can do a huge amount for animals along the way. So if we think about shade, really so many things are happening with the animal when they're too hot. You know, if they've reached a point where their heat load is higher than their ability to get rid of that heat, then they're starting to get things going on internally. So they're stopping eating, they are cutting off systems that aren't important to survival. So their digestive tract is closing down, their reproductive tract is closing down. So you get real knock-on effects of not just loss of production while that animal is suffering heat stress, but you're getting increased diseases because the permeability of the digestive tract increases as that blood flow is redirected. So you're getting inflammation in the animal, so you're getting higher mastitis levels, disease levels like that. You're also getting affected fertility, reduced growth in fetus. And if an animal, a dairy cow, for example, is suffering heat stress at dry-off, then she has less immunoglobulin in her colostrum, and that calf then is more predisposed to ill health. And if it's a heifer, she has reduced milk yield in her first lactation. So these are real knock-on effects, that impact production, but actually by creating an environment where the animals can show better health, if you like, these are reducing inputs at the time and maintaining outputs at a later date. So just really wanted to put that in the mix.
No, that's really interesting.
Could I just add, Kate, that we are working with Bangor University and with a PhD where we've gotten a model sheep, it's a mimic of a Welsh mountain ewe, to do just that, to be put out into different situations of either enough shade or shelter or not enough in different weather patterns, and to look at the energy that sheep is wasting really to keep the ambient body temperature. And that basically is affecting the food conversion efficiency. So, I think there's lots of ways of looking at it, and there's lots of examples of where you are addressing issues on the farm, whether that's preventing soil erosion, whether that's improving the soil health. I know there was a question in the chat about water management. There's some really good evidence of silver pastoral schemes in Northern Ireland where the trees have improved the water infiltration rates into the soil, so that the carrying capacity of that grazed pasture and amongst them is so much greater that they're getting about 17 weeks extra grazing per year, so beginning and the end of the seasons. And that warmth that Ben was talking about with the growing of vegetables between the alleys, that applies in a pasture situation. So, hopefully in time, Paul will see that he gets, the soils will be warmer at the beginning and the end of the season, so he should get better grass growth. So yeah, there's lots of ways. And then just to throw in finally, of course, if elm comes as we think it is, then farmers in theory will be paid for those public goods that trees can help deliver, whether that's carbon, whether that's the beauty of the landscape and access, and how that's all going to be done is still in the mix, but trees will contribute to that whole combination.
I think that touches on an important point, because I think one of the hesitations that I've heard from farmers before is that not wanting to get involved in a scheme like that, if it then in the future jeopardizes an agri-environment scheme that they then get involved in, and reducing land area or otherwise, and it will get very, very complicated very quickly. So what do you think is like an answer to that? So the scheme isn't, my understanding is the scheme's not fully set yet. Is that what you were saying? And so, what would you say to those people that are hesitating for those reasons?
Yeah, I mean, we've got this transitional period in England, certainly, that before elm comes out in supposedly 2024, and there is a real confusing time, and I can understand completely why farmers are in despair. Really, they're being criticised in the press as being, as being major contributors to some of the challenges we're facing in terms of nature's declines and climate change, and whereas in fact they are, they have the opportunity, and many are already, to make a real positive difference. So I can understand why farmers are just putting their head in the sand. We don't know what's going to be happening with trade deals. We don't know what's going to be happening with Brexit as we come out, and we certainly don't have any firm ideas of what elm will look like in England. And the same applies to the Scottish and Welsh schemes. All I would say is that, as some of the others have said, is that the time to plant trees is now, and what we're calling for very strongly from DEFRA is they've got to come out and clearly state that farmers will not be penalised, and we'll, in our own small way, will then continue to do that, and I'm sure everybody else will as well. They have to come out with some really clear messages that farmers must take action now, they must be supported to take that action now, and they will not be penalised. But I can understand why farmers are, and there is evidence to show farmers are not joining, and not taking up or renewing countryside stewardship schemes, etc., because of that doubt. personally, from a Woodland Trust perspective, we're not seeing that, in the sense that we're still being there's an over demand for our schemes. But it's an issue.
Yeah, I suspect your schemes are not quite as complicated to get hold of, or as long to wait for payment. Perhaps that's a big issue in itself, isn't it? Another question we had from our participants was about pollarding and tree hay. Has anybody looked into this, and or are they implementing it? Tree hay, I don't know anything about. If any of our panel know a bit more about this, yes, Andy, please go.
We do a bit already, and I think it's a very valid thing. Basically, it's there as a safety net. If you run out of grass, you can lop a few branches off. Last winter, we ran short of food for our deer, so we cut down holly trees where we didn't want to have holly trees and dragged them into the field, and that didn't have to cheer the deer up for a few days. So it's there. It's practiced widely across other parts of the world, and I love pollarding. I think pollarding is a great additional tool to have in your kit to provide a different shaped tree. You can, I mean, plant trees, it's great. Everybody's terrified of cutting the damn things down again and cutting bits off them. They're not it's not a religion, and cutting them down creates more growth if you do it at the right time of the year. It's just a great option, really. So I think you want to plan a bit of that in, and as going back to the start now in a small scale, and try that as one of the many management techniques that you can apply to it. And going back to the alley planting of arable and things like that, well, if you've got too much shading, well, cut the tops of your trees down. You can manage your canopy with a chainsaw. Don't be frightened of chainsaws. Thank you.
And Paul, you'd mentioned about thinning an element of your hedges as well. Could you just go over that again? So you're planning, do you say you were thinning out the willow?
No, well, the willow is on the outside of this browsable hedge, and I'm hoping that the cows and the sheep are going to prune that and keep that at bay. And it's medicinal, got medicinal properties, as Lindsey was saying earlier on. But it's something I'm interested in, that tree hay. I just don't know how viable it is for big herds or big flocks. But you can tell. I mean, you only got to look at cows. If they go up to a tree branch that's fallen in the field with a load of dried leaves on it, they eat them all, and they'll strip the bark off the branch as well. There's something there that they want. It's just how we can do that perhaps on a larger scale, and that's something that will, a lot of our woods are quite young at the moment, so I don't really want to have to take a chainsaw to them too much.
I think also an interesting element of that is, do you feel you have good access to advice or research about what trees would make very effective tree hay? Do you feel like you've got that at your fingertips, or is that still an area you, given ample time, would be able to go research, or do you think there's an area where there's a big gap?
There's people working on this, Helen. Isn't there there's I can't remember his name now. I met him at one of the conferences.
Ted, I mean, there's Ted Green, who's the old guy.
Quite an old chap, isn't he? But Sorry.
So he's a great believer in it, and he's coming from it from more of the tree perspective. But I think it's the scalability of it. I mean, Lindsey, you were out at one of the farmers, the dairy farmer Tim Dan's, last week, weren't you? And we helped him create some willow medicinal trials in his rotational grazing system for his dairy cows, and you advised him, didn't you, Lindsey, to pollard those, and they were planted in 2016, and he thought he'd get 1 trailer load, and he's got 5 trailer loads of material, which he's now got one of his sheds. He's put them in one of his sheds to dry. But I mean, Lindsey, you may, certainly the Organic Research Centre have done some work on this, haven't you? It's the scalability, I think, is one of the issues.
Yeah, scalability is definitely an issue. Yes, with the farmer last week, as you were saying, I mean, what he really wanted to do was to ensile it. but he's left it too late for this year to ensile. I mean, it's already too dry, and willow is particularly a dry leaf already. So that's why hay has been made. He wanted to pollard them already now, so that seems to be the best solution. But yeah, in terms of scalability, I mean, his approach this time is to give it to the dry cows. So in a way, he's reducing his herd quite considerably to the few that are dry at the time. And, as Andy said, he started and he's learning, and he'll get it a bit wrong. Of course he will. But I'd also put him in touch with a Belgian dairy goat farmer who is already practicing tree hay. So hopefully they're having some good conversations with each other. Actually, there's not that much information out there, and I've been having to read some historical documents, some work that was done in Sweden, where a researcher has gone around asking farmers what they did before their memories are forgotten, and how they manage it. But yes, absolutely. I mean, scale is an issue, and it always will be an issue. But ensiling could potentially help create a solution, perhaps, for bigger groups of animals. And one thing that ensiling does, I mean, it's got to be done correctly, of course, but one thing that does, it maintains the levels of condensed tannins, which drying, wilting reduces. So if there is an issue, or you want condensed tannins, either for parasite control or for increased protein, so rumen bypass protein. I know we haven't talked about that here, but having about 5% of your dry matter with condensed tannins, that will sort of bind the protein, so they pass the rumen and then they get delivered directly to the abomasum, which is really, the holy grail of dairy farming anyway. So yes, so that's one of the benefits of ensiling, but we have to learn or relearn how to do these things. Yeah.
And just one word of caution, and that is stripping of bark is a slightly learned behaviour. So if you put green stuff in, then you might be teaching your sheep bad habits.
Yes, somebody has mentioned that as well. There's a question to Paul from Liz Charles. Will the cows and the sheep damage the bark? And said that sheep had killed some of the willow at their site by grazing through a fence.
Yeah, I think unless it's those Shropshire, which sheep was it that breed? Was it the Shropshire?
Yeah, it was the Shropshires, yeah.
Yeah, unless you've got them, I think most sheep and cattle that I've ever dealt with will have a go at most things. But one thing I did notice this time, we planted along a beck edge, and we put in aspens and alders, and some of the alders we put in spiral guards. And I had some sheep I was going to sell the next day, and I just put them down this lane next door to this. They jumped in over the wall and nailed all of these alders that were in the spiral guards. And it happened twice in the summer. And now, and that was quite a long time ago now, there's leaves on those things that it's in a way, it's kind of made them more vigorous in a way. So, and they've all come back into, so they've come back into leaf 3 times this summer, those little things. So that's pretty amazing. So I've learned that this summer.
Yeah. Always learning, I imagine, with these systems. So on that point about shading and losing pasture area, I think this is an important one, because I hear it again and again of people feeling reticent about that. Ben, in your experience as an advisor with the Soil Association and having to deal with these kinds of queries, what would your advice be there about trying to manage that decision making?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the big things is that a lot of it actually is a bit of a misconception. So there's a study I saw where they looked at the performance of different forage species in 50% shade and in 80% shade. And then they looked at 43 different species, and all of them perform better in 50% shade than in full sun. And almost all of them perform better in 80% shade than in full sun. So I think this idea that you sort of automatically are losing pasture by planting trees is not always true. I mean, obviously, if you're planting a hedge that's going to be full, you won't be able to graze underneath that. But if you're planting rows of trees or groups of trees that might then be grazed underneath, you can still maintain a pretty productive understory even with quite a lot of shade. So, you know, that's not to say that there isn't ever going to be competition, or, you know, you won't ever get dry patches. But, you know, we certainly saw in 2018, you know, the only green bits of grass were under trees. That was the only bit that was still growing, you know. So it's different areas might behave slightly differently in different years, but I think there's big opportunities to keep the existing productivity in your grass, or possibly even improve it while still having some trees there.
I think that's a really important point regarding the land management schemes, isn't it? To say, if you're going off aerial imaging or mapping, and if you have tree cover, for example, you still have, you know, workable pasture underneath. I think that's quite an important point there. It's not going to be doubling up area, is it? It's in itself, it shouldn't be excluded from that mapping exercise. That's quite important on a practical scale, isn't it, if talking about how those schemes are rewarded. It's very interesting. Well, we haven't got much longer left, but I would like to get another point from the audience before we have to close up. But we've got a question here from Bill Grayson. Which is better, Ben? Higher yield or better nutritional content? Our cows don't like eating grass growing under dense canopy, presumably because it doesn't contain as much sugars. What's your thoughts there, Ben?
Oh, crikey, I don't know if I'm the right person to answer that. I think I might defer to Lindsey on that one.
Yeah, Bill, I think you're probably right. It is probably the sugar that's doing it. Yeah, I mean, this really highlights that we've still got so much more to learn, haven't we? Yeah, and I was actually thinking about what Ben was saying earlier. Again, the number of trees is an important thing to think about, certainly with livestock, where you might get changes in sward composition if you've got too few trees. So the animals are overutilising some areas, so they're changing, you know, they're crushing the grass, trampling, death of vegetation, and then you're just getting weeds and perhaps really unwanted plants in that area. Yeah, so, sorry, Bill, I've got nothing more to say. You're probably right. But
so
then,
I think...
Sorry, actually, maybe Andy's point, you know, lightening the canopy, that plays a part here.
So with saying there's lots of research left to do, Robert Mills here has said, you know, what would be the sort of top research question that farmers can help with? You know, what would be that number one burning question that really hasn't been solved yet? Big question, sorry.
It's a huge question. I mean, for me, yeah, it's more on a landscape level. You know, it's relearning how to bring trees back into our farmed land, and being comfortable with them being there. Because I look at the animals in the round, I see trees as being a fundamental component of improving their living experience. So to break it down to one aspect is too small for me.
Yeah. Well, I see that we're sort of getting a bit low on time. If any of the panel have any kind of last minute points they wanted to make that we haven't been able to raise so far, then yes, Andy?
Well, I mean, livestock enjoy living in trees, but actually so do I. So I think it's all very well being mealy-mouthed and trying to make lots of money out of it, but actually, for me, it's a nicer environment to live in, and you don't get taxed on the fact you're living in a nicer environment, which farmers hate being taxed. So that's my observation.
Very, very good point there. Well, I'm afraid we're sort of coming near to the end. What I'd like to say to everybody that's participated, I'm sorry for any questions we couldn't get to. What we'll do is we'll save a copy of the chat. The session has been recorded as well, and it should be available, I think, on NRFC's YouTube channel or their website. But if you can't find it, please do get in touch with us at Innovative Farmers as well, or the NRFC team. But just to say a big thank you to our speakers, I think there's lots to take away from this, and that, you know, the huge swathe of potential benefits for livestock if you get it right. Planting too few trees has really stuck with me there, Lindsey, in regards to sort of pests. But starting small and learning, Andy's advice there, that makes a lot of sense there. If you're able to just get cracking, just push through that sort of that risk barrier to just get started, and it will start you on a really good learning journey. It sounds, from what everybody's said, you know, there's huge amounts of planning required, seeking advice, seeing what's out there. Obviously there's lots of research that still needs to happen, but there is advice out there, but you've got to spend a bit of time to plot this out. And that policy needs to make sure with new land management schemes that farmers are not penalised for doing what's clearly, with the evidence that is available, clearly a very beneficial practice if done well and correctly and with good thought. And Ben's point as well about the understory can still be very productive, and not to block that necessarily in your planning. And it's 3 o'clock, and I'm really sorry to finish here, because I could listen to you all talk about your agroforestry projects all day. But thank you so much to Helen, Ben, Paul, Andy and Lindsey for joining us today, and I hope everybody found that useful. We will, as I say, we'll make all of this available to everybody after the sessions. But thank you so much. I hope everybody's enjoyed it, and you'll probably see something from us all soon, I'm sure. Thank you so much, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks.